We're back again with my good friend, Dr. Joe Wolf, and we'll be talking about The Tale of Macduff's Pig. So we've already, I've gone through and given a plot summary of it. Not a lot of plot to get in the way of the story here, but a lot of fun stuff in here. This tale is known for being this sort of comic send-up or parody. Again, it's hard to say exactly how an audience at the time would have understood this story. Just because something is comic or over-the-top slapsticky doesn't mean these people aren't viewed seriously.
Right.
Again, talk to any comic book fan. You'll very strong opinions about figures that are very, comic. They're comic books. Macduff's Pig also just sort of interesting, right? Because in a tale where it's all about claims of heroic boasting and prowess, no Cuchulainn.
Yeah.
Completely absent. So what do you think of when you think of this tale?
When I think of this tale, I think of, its comedy stands out to me more than anything else. This is one of the texts I suppose I should say, most fond of. The size of the pig, the heroic attempts to outdo your rivals, the references to essentially humiliating other warriors. I raided your property, I took your cows, I slept with your wife. Here's the head of the guy you claim could outdo me, right?
Yeah.
They're always just catching themselves in these humorous one-upmanships. But then the tale ends with this just orgy of violence, essentially, which undoes the entire logic for them being there in the first place. The hound is killed.
The hound is killed. Some people have said that this is, the futility of the struggle is, with talking about Culhne, there's so much in between the desire to get the Don Culhne, the black bull of Cooley, and it's the fight between it and the Finn Benachai, the white-horned steer of Eye Plain, is quite epic. I mean, their fight against each other is quite epic. That you kind of lose sight of the fact that no one has either bull at the end of it. It's a whole other discussion. I think that is probably intentional in a sense in that story, which I think has much more clear some mythological underpinnings, but whatever the original mythic idea was. There's changes to landscape. We get some names of places here, but they're not changes to the landscape. They're just places where Alva's head fell off or Alva was killed, so that becomes named it. A lot of people when people started pointing out that this is sort of parodic, that's one of the things that they pointed to, right? That no one ends up with the thing they fought over.
Yeah.
Although they did eat all that tasty pig flesh
yes.
At the feast. So in a sense, the Ulstermen do come out ahead, in a sense.
And Macduff himself is sort of an interesting figure.
Yeah, even just in his name, right? Like, he's another one of these Da guys, like Dederga, right? So also a hospitaller. So the Da being this divine word or God word in some way.
Possibly, yeah.
Possibly, or a reference to it, right? He's nonetheless...
the other etymology is he's the son of the two mutes.
Right.
The two people who cannot speak, which could be plausible, although at the same time, it's an interesting... You wouldn't expect it for somebody whose role is basically as a host. This is somebody who has to talk, who's presumably very socially gifted. And we kind of see that in here. It doesn't work out for him in the end.
But he is quite clever, or at least his wife is quite clever. Yeah, maybe we should give him too much credit.
Or his wife too much credit, because his whole home is destroyed at the end of it. But there's a neat inversion of, like in Dederga's hostel, it's the guests at Dederga's hostel who are killed.
Yes.
Right. I think the house is destroyed at the end of it, if I recall correctly. Yeah. It's been a while. Here, the guests kind of escape, but it's the host is completely ruined. But yeah, whatever exactly it is, and it's also sort of, sometimes he's referred to almost as a king among the Leinstermen. That doesn't,
But it to some extent cleaves with what we see in depictions of early Irish society, where the hospitaller, whose job it is to provide security and shelter and food for travelers, is elevated within the social landscape to be someone on the level of a king. not a king himself, but also evocative of the role that a king is expected to play within his own household.
One who gives away goods, who provides, yes, exactly, like feasting and as part of binding the social contract. And I guess not to get too far afield, but as I recall, right, hospitalers or hostel keepers, right, of this level, right, they're sometimes called royal. I think that's where the confusion comes in, because they have like they're technically they're non-nobles, but they are so high in rank because they're so wealthy.
Yeah.
Like a wealthy merchant in, say, the colonial British system, right, who may not be able to buy their way into nobility, but has so much wealth from this other source that they're able to kind of negotiate, sometimes even marriage alliances with people of the landed nobility and things like that.
And I think what it reveals to us kind of these anxieties you have within pre-modern societies, or just society in general, of how do you handle people who have significantly more resources than others? How are they treated? And the more you can integrate them into the social unit, the more that inequality between them and the rest of quote-unquote normal society can be reckoned. And if the way the early Irish handled dealing with these people who become immensely wealthy but otherwise kind of buck the system, they're not part of the standard client-lord hierarchy.
Or, I mean, they are, but they're so powerful that they're kind of hard to compel into doing what you want as their lord. Yeah.
You turn them into something else. You give them another function that kind of preys upon the social contract. Not preys upon, but takes advantage of. They get rendered into these gift givers, voluntarily or otherwise.
But also still keeps them dependent, I mean, ironically dependent on the warrior aristocracy, because presumably maybe they can hire mercenaries or something like that. You would certainly think there's probably enough of them around in early medieval Ireland.
Yeah.
But they're not allowed to enfief anybody else. They're not allowed to have vassals. They're not allowed to do the things that normally provide you a fighting force, even in the kind of the form of client lord vassal relationship that prevails in Ireland in the early period. They're still kind of, they're forced to be in parallel and separate from the martial function of the society, and that's also a good way of controlling them. So I think we can imagine, to give an example, at my urging, you're starting to watch The Sopranos, right?
Indeed.
And I think warrior aristocracies as a kind of mafia is really very much true. That's sort of how the mafia, at least self-mythologizes, at least in media. But it's sort of that idea of if you're a wealthy businessman in an area where there are competing organized crime syndicates, and they're both demanding protection money from you, but they'll both punish you if you give protection money to the other syndicate. You're put in this position, like, how do you get out of that? And that's very much the situation he's in here. Like, how do I not end up being completely destroyed? And it's an ingenious solution. It doesn't work out, but it's at least an attempt to
use the rules of society to navigate out of the role society has created.
Exactly.
And poetically demonstrates that you can. Regardless of independent wealth and capacity like Macdotho has, he nonetheless is subject to martial power. That's the inescapable fact, is like physical power can compel economic authority.
Right. At the end of it, when push comes to shove, your only recourse would then be to, again, hire other...
Yep. These are by and large all the people he would hire.
Exactly it. Exactly. Well, if he's in Leinster, maybe the Fianna are running around somewhere off screen. But also you have to be careful too. I mean, the story, for instance, of Vortigern, or Gorthean, right? I mean, who invites the Saxons in as mercenaries to defend him against other foreign raiders. Mercenaries are also come with their own dangers, especially when they are of a different ethnic group. And have no existing ties to anybody in the area. The story is one of those that you just kind of have to read for yourself to get the back and forth between the different warriors and the kind of macabre humor of it, right? Of these people who have been disfigured even to the point of castration, people who have been injured fleeing from battle, even though, was it the Iron Heel or Sword Heel?
Yeah.
right? That's the one where, boy, that sounds like that could be a tough name.
Yeah.
Right? Like it could, because the heel of the sword could be like the grip, like it could be the pommel. But no, it turns out it's because he ran away and got his heel sliced off by a sword. Um, and then to have Ket, who is does exist, have an independent existence from this tale, to have him shown up by Conall Cernach in this way is so, perfect.
Yeah.
It even in translation, the timing of, like, the sort of pacing and timing is so perfect of how he reveals that, no, he has his brother's head in under his belt. And then to the, I think the Irish is a little ambiguous. When it says that he throws the head so that blood is on its lips, but I think because of the way noun gender works in Irish, it could be that the blood actually spatters onto Ked's mouth. That I think that may really be what's going on here. That he gets his own brother's blood splashed like into his own mouth
as he's preparing to eat.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And he just can't escape it, right? And that to me is the interesting part of why the boasting in, like, jockeying for the position of chief, the chief hero here, right? The hero's portion is so important to their social role because they have suffered all of this humiliation in battle, all this disfigurement, and what's the reward? In theory, your only reward is to be known as the best, and this is the mark of the best. And so in Ket's case, he's demonstrating that he's the best, he's about to claim his reward, and he's undone by the humiliation of not just his role, but his family. The shame physically marks him in the form of presumably in the form of the blood here.
Yeah, that's sort of the thing where, again, it's easy for us to kind of, these are kind of like meatheads, arguing over a piece of meat. And yes, I think for the people writing this who are monastic scribes, at least in the early period, they probably do have some, it's certainly not, these are monastic scribes, and the people they're describing are certainly not acting in a Christian manner. And the whole issue of, like, what is a warrior aristocracy's role in a Christian society is a big one in Europe in the Middle Ages, just everywhere. But this is the deal. You die early, you suffer grievous injury, defend, but you have outsized, you have these outsized rewards. It's a high risk, high reward type of life, and you probably will die young. But that's the deal you make, and you're accorded honor and value for that, because otherwise, again, it is to go back to the mafia type thing, right? Well, this is my ethnic groups, this is my locality's protection bracket, so that we have some form of interconnection to where they might, protect me from an outside group, even as they prey upon me as just a normal person producing, usually being a farmer or a craftsman or something like that in this society. So it does kind of get both the seriousness and the silliness to some degree of these behaviors, I think.
But I think the silliness is necessary to really get the emotional gravity of what is at play here, right? Like, sometimes the best lens for social critique is, in fact, humor, right? That's the whole parody genre. I don't think this is a parody, but I think the way the humor operates is on the same level. The humor is exemplifying, like shining a light directly on, honestly, just it's not a great life to be one of these guys.
It's not a great, it's tough. This is not a purely subsistence level society, but there's not a lot of surplus that's generated. Which is also why feasting is so important, because it's a way of kind of everybody viewing how the surplus is distributed, so that everybody at least gets some share, even if it's proportional to their status in the society. It's also like when I would teach undergrads, I would try to explain why, like, the importance of providing alcohol isn't just the fact that you get drunk with your friends and have fun. That's obviously an important social role, although it can be dangerous as well. But it's also because you cannot make alcohol unless you have an agricultural surplus to ferment. It is a sign of your prosperity to be able to devote, and it's also a way of locking in calories sometimes, particularly in the winter months. That's why you have, like, Lenten beers and things like this. Not that that comes into play here necessarily, but it's sort of the logic of the society at a material level. So to say a little bit about Conall Cernach, I think, he's important, and he's one of Cuchulain's foster brothers, but he usually plays second fiddle to him in these stories. Even though he's always accorded quite a lot of like dignity, I would say. He's never played as like a comic second fiddle to Cuchulain.
Right. He almost feels as though he is the hero. He's the real hero, juxtaposed to like the mythical hero of Cuchulain. Cuchulain can do all of these things and is at least framed in a way that exemplifies his difference, whereas Conall Cernach seems to be, and especially in this text, framed in a way that exemplifies he is the hero's hero.
Yeah, he unlike Cuchulain, his father is a member of the Ulstermen. Put a pin in that because we're going to talk about his parentage and why he hates the Connachtas so much. Yeah. But you know, he himself has some interesting characteristics, as though he's a kind of chimera, like biologically in his description, where one side of his face is one complexion and the other is another. The color of his eyes and his hair changes, as if he's two things fused together. So there's still an element to which he's half inside, half outside. But his half that's inside the Ulstermen, his father's half, is the part that actually makes him fully a member of the tribe in a way that Cuchulain with a mother that is a member of the Ulstermen, is not. Yeah, and just so I don't want to get too far afield on this because it's very conjectural, but Conall Cernach, Conall of the Horns, right? I don't know that there's actually a description of him having horns or a horned helmet even necessarily.
No, and some of the texts seem to be somewhat anxious about this, trying to explain his name. Yeah. He appears in the name tale lists as, grappling with the odd form that his name takes. And we see that in one of those stories where, for instance, he is born as a result of his mother eating an insect.
Like Cuchulain, actually.
In fact, like Cuchulain. And trying to, somehow justify the idea that he's horned or pierced or swollen. It's described as the insect piercing the hand and causing a swelling within this child, who is then born with this physical deformity of some sort.
Right. Even though as we're I think we'll talk. Well, just to say too, sometimes, I think you and I are both a little bit more open to these discussions of mythological antecedents, these figures, even if we don't know what form that was exactly. Sometimes it's clear. Sometimes the text states explicitly these are, sort of pre-Christian or non-Christian semi-divine figures. There's reference in classical sources to Cernunnos, the horned one. A lot of people have drawn a connection between Conall Cernach and Cernunnos, as well as an image on the Gundestrup cauldron. Again, this is all very tenuously connected. It's impossible to say. I think it's an interesting avenue to explore some other time. I don't think it can be proven.
Oh, of course.
I think it's easy, and I think it's very easy to point out some of the weaknesses of the connections. But it is interesting, especially given that Conall Cernach, he doesn't seem to hang out at home. He does seem to be kind of off in the woods hunting. Or more specifically, hunting Connachta a lot. And so that kind of gets into, in the Irish stories, obviously, whatever possible connection he may have to some broader Celtic antecedent, which, whatever. His actual origin in Irish storytelling is really interesting, right? Because as we said, his father is Averhin, or we haven't mentioned that, but his father is Averhin, the poet of the Ulstermen. His mother is Finchoib, which is the sister of Ced MacMahach. So Ced is his uncle, right, on his mother's side. And Anluin, whose head he brings out and throws, is also one of his uncles. So you must say, well, especially in a society where the sister's son is very close, and even in plenty of, there's plenty of examples of this in modern society, or of the sister's son being viewed as closer than your brother's son, because well, of how biologically children are produced. You know you're biologically related to that child. So it's a kind of interesting. It's sort of interesting the way prophecy can kind of work as a causal loop, right? The prophecy can cause the knowledge of the prophecy causes the prophecy to come true. So when Connell is born, I believe, I don't think it's when he's in utero, but when he's born, and you get reference to these sorts of things again. Whether this is actually what pagan Ireland was like, where they call the Druids and say, "Give a prophecy of the child." You see it in a lot of tales. And the prophecy that's given for Connell is he will kill half of his maternal kin, half of the Connachtha. So Ket, his mother's brother, is there and throws him down on the ground and stomps on his neck. And this is the deformity that Connell Cairnach is referred to a lot as having this crooked neck, or maybe even kind of a hunchback. Doesn't manage to kill Connell. Not really sure. I forget exactly how he's saved from the desire of the Connachtha to kill him.
I think it just leaves off. They just kind of move on from it.
So they mark him. I mean, they try to kill him as an infant, and then mark him as an enemy. So of course, when he grows up with his father's kin, and they're already their tribal enemies, yeah, he just goes wild. And it says, I think in Macduff's Pig and another text, that he would never sleep without the head of a Connachtha under his knee, I believe. So he's just got this murderous, and he's a big headhunter. He loves cutting off heads. Not unique in that regard, but it's what he does to the Connachtha in particular. So this all fits together nicely. Like you were saying too about his position more firmly within the Ulstermen. This isn't the only story where Ulster tale where Cuchulainn is absent as the big hero of his generation. And some people, I mean, Cuchulainn obviously must exist in some fashion at a very early date from the Conla Medha, I'm butchering the pronunciation as I don't have it in front of me. But the very early poem that seems to refer to events in the time between Medha and Cuchulainn. But it does seem that Cuchulainn maybe displaces Connell Cairnach as the primary hero of the Ulster cycle, and that maybe Cuchulainn, this topic for a later video, maybe a more local hero to Louth, to the area around Dundalk, modern-day Dundalk. But because a prominent monastic family comes from there and he is their local hero, he is given this prime place in these stories. And so this may be a window on something independent kind of tradition where he is not the main hero.
Or really just envisioning part of the Ulster cycle where another hero gets to take center stage. And particularly a hero where, I mean, this is part of the what's so poetic about his sudden arrival within the feast is he is carrying the head of his uncle, right? He has done what is in theory a profane act within that society.
Yeah.
But it is couched within the language and the context and the setting of displaying his heroic prominence, because it's the question of what can divide a family, and in this case, it is literally a family divided by prophecy, divided by, rivalry between kingdoms, and in the specific context of this narrative, they're both on opposite sides of trying to get the good, so to speak. And so it's to me, it's always striking that his profane act of kinslaying is just kind of hand-waved away, but also used as a proxy for him to triumph over yet another half of his family and also his prophesized enemy.
And maybe this is not independent of the Cuchulainn idea of Cuchulainn as the pyramid, but if Cuchulainn was there, then the listener would ask, well, why would Connell Cairnach need to come and show up Ket? Shouldn't Cuchulainn be able to do that?
And so if you get Cuchulainn out of the way, you get to then suddenly tell this extended, I mean, it's not really a resolution to his birth. Not at all, but it's certainly, it's within the dialogue of his narrative, right? And Cuchulainn would just muddy the waters.
I mean, you could say, too, the idea of the reason why people in these societies ideally try to avoid blood feuds is because it will just go on and on and on. What happens when the blood feud is between people of only one degree of separation and consanguinity? It's this bloody. Yeah. And Connell Cairnach, doesn't stop killing Connachtha until he himself is killed. It's his thing. He will not stop. And again, it's a little interesting too. Like again, Cuchulain's absence a little interesting, also because we have one of his eventual killers is present at the feast, Lugath McConroy, Lugath son of Curoy. And Curoy also just sort of pops up out of nowhere to rip up one of the trees or something and carry off part of the pig at the end. Again, Curoy always a fun, what the hell's going on type of character. And why is somebody from southwest Munster here in this dispute between three other very disparate parts of Ireland that are not that close to Curoy? I don't know.
Other than to rip up the tree, which to me is the most entertaining part of the tale.
Yeah, I mean, so again, it's a lot of fun. There isn't. I think we've talked about at least amount of notes on this one, like maybe a couple hundred words, because it's pretty straightforward.
I think the last interesting bit to note is what the hero's portion actually is. The part of the pig that gets eaten first is the belly, right?
In the rear, like the ham.
Yeah. And it's this the extended scene where he sucks it all up, and this is the great feat of reserved for what? 9 men.
It says specifically the tail would fill the bellies of 9 men.
9 men, 9 men, and just sucks it all up. In thinking of such a large portion, would surely be possible to split among several people, right? But I think that kind of underscores the quote unquote truly heroic nature of the hero here, right? They can do the thing that other people can't.
Yeah,
and you see this.
And it doesn't. I don't think the term Kodathmir is used in the text, but this is clearly the same sort of, whether it's cultural custom or literary motif, storytelling motif, doesn't really matter for our discussion, but that the preeminent warrior takes the best bit of the pig. And so it's again, we've talked about there's a kind of parallelism with Toimbo Cunha, but also with Bricriu's feast, with Fleabhrickan, where and that's the feast where it's settled that Cuchulainn is the preeminent warrior of the Ulstermen. So again, his absence maybe a narrative necessity more than anything else, as well as giving Conall a chance to shine against his tribes and his personal enemies, his mother's kin. Right. I mean, I think just what can we say about the final bit with Ferloge? This bizarre episode.
I honestly don't know what to say about that final bit. It's odd.
I mean, I think most commentary on it just says like this whole thing is so patently absurd and like ribald, right?
Yeah.
That you have to take it as kind of undercutting the absurd nature of the whole story. I mean, I think there's some truth to that, but I don't think Ferloge as the charioteer of Maeve and Owl ever appears again. The Ferloge, I mean, it definitely is absurd. Like, Ferloge is my darling. Like these, I struggle to figure out what to say about it. I mean, I think it's interesting. He comes away with, as like, it maybe makes sense because he's a charioteer, but he comes away with the golden bridle of Conchobar.
Yeah.
And 2 horses.
Yeah.
Right? So these are like things that are appropriate to a charioteer.
I mean, I think his disposability within the narrative is important, because if they're going to have someone kill the hound, it has to be someone who doesn't carry consequence for that. I suppose, Maybe that's trying to bring too much logic to a character who just is there. But also engages in a wild ride, quite similar to other... I don't know.
It is. It's tough. I think my notes literally are just Ferloge, question mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, and so on.
I mean, for me, the most interesting part of the Ferloge bit at the very end.
I mean, it's sort of why I like doing this. I'm sort of doing these videos for the lay, non-specialists, people who aren't familiar with these stories, because if you read this stuff just as it is, you'll be completely befuddled. Right, but sometimes even people who we've dealt with these stories a lot, we're very familiar with it, but there's still just stuff that's just, I don't know. It made sense to whoever decided to include it, that it deserved to be there. I don't know what the point is or what it connects to, if anything, anywhere else.
Because it feels as though, like, the text. I mean, the charioteer is unnamed in section 19, right? The penultimate section of the text. He's unnamed.
Right.
He kills the dog.
Yeah.
And then we have this little discourse on who he is and what he's doing. And then we get the final end of the tale. And so this is how the Ulster and the Connacht fell about the hound of Macdatho and his pig. Right? Like, it's like okay, the text already ended. I gave you a bit of an epilogue. Now we're gonna finish it. It really does feel as though the information about him is extraneous.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we just don't have another story where Ferloge matters, and this is just kind of like, oh yeah, he was also present here, but he's in this other story, and we just don't have it. I mean, the story was popular enough that apparently, sort of the way that we're plagued by kind of prequels.
Yeah.
Or we need the origin of every obscure character or something. This story does kind of have that, because there are later stories about where the huge pig comes from.
Right.
And how it was raised and how it killed its pig keeper, and so it was always kind of cursed to cause this death and destruction, which seems to be a later addition. Whatever the origins of this enormous pig are, it seems that eventually they lost track of whatever other significance it had, just started coming up with like reasons for why it existed and why Macdatho had it. Because it says it was sort of fed and prepared for this feast, but why? Who would know to do that? So I think they come up with a prophecy later and this explanation for why the pig was raised this way. But so I think it's possible that maybe Ferloge is an existing character somewhere else, and we just don't have the tale. And then after this, people are like, "Well, that's all we need to know about Ferloge," and never backfilled his character. Yeah, I don't know.
It's just introduced that he gets introduced without a name.
Yeah.
And then he gets a name, which is not how the other characters are introduced within the text, right? Cade comes forward, like he gets called out, not the great warrior. 3 paragraphs later.
Right,
by the way, his name was.
I think it says first, like, Ferloge jumped into Conqueror's chariot, and then it says he was, the charioteer of Maven Allah. Like, it then specifies, oh yeah, that's who this guy is. Because we haven't mentioned it before.
Right, he's just not otherwise there.
Yeah, seemingly, yeah. And then, I guess the purpose he serves is, yes, killing the dog, and then we get the 2 place names related to the dog.
Right, and that's actually probably what's going on, right?
I don't have any more to say about Macdatho's pig.
No, it's a fun tale. A comedic aside more than...
Yeah.
It's entertainment. It highlights aspects of warrior culture and society, and uses, I think, comedy to convey serious concerns. And on the whole is enjoyable. If I was ever going to recommend a single tale for a non-expert to read and have fun with, it would exactly be
a lot of motifs, social dynamics that you'll need to kind of understand in order to understand other stories. But this one can kind of stand alone. Yeah. It explains itself enough that you understand what's happening and why it's whose motivations are what.
And it's fun. Gets you excited about this. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again, Dr. Wolf. And I think we'll round out here. And we still have one more tale to record in this recording session. So if you enjoyed this one, keep an eye out for the other 2 that are coming out with this batch. And we hope you'll join us for that. Thanks.